Welcome, Tony. Tony Hughes-d'aeth is a lecturer in English and Literary Studies at the University of Western Australia. He is the author of a book called Like Nothing on This Earth, A Literary History of the Wheat Belt. His grandfather was born in Wagen, and his uncle, aunt and cousin live in Watheroo. Just like to welcome you, Tony, and I look forward to reading your book, getting a copy of your book and reading it, and thank you for making the effort to come up to speak to us in Moora. And we just really value your contribution. Would you all like to give him a welcome?
Thank you, everyone. It's an honour to be here, and I'm Ewart country, and in Moora today to talk about just ways that we can think about preservation. And my work has been historical and literary. So my colleague from UWA, Dr. Lawrence, already mentioned Dorothy Hewitt and John Kinsella. They're important parts of my book. There is 11 chapters, and they take you from the turn of the last century to the beginning of this century and the creation of what we call the wheat belt. So that's what my book is. I treat the wheat belt, the creation of the wheat belt, as an event. It took 100 years, but as Colin just said, really what we're talking about is often just a lifetime, a single lifetime. So in the deep time of nature and the deep time of Aboriginal existence, we're talking about an eye blink, really. So I treat the wheat belt, the creation of the wheat belt through the 20th century, as an event, and I treat the writers, and there's quite a remarkable range of writers to come out of the wheat belt, as witnesses to that event. So in some ways, this history is a book of witnessing. So that's the wheat belt, and this is sort of roughly how it was created. Sort of basically with two 30-year periods where it got cleared, mainly between 1900 and up to the Depression, the 1930, and then things went on hold for about 20 years. And then kicked off again after World War II, and we had another round of clearing and sort of infilling on flight country, which yielded the current extent of the wheat belt that you saw in the previous satellite photograph. So that's acres being cleared basically, areas of land being alienated. You can see the curved part, so those two 30-year periods with the break in between. So we get a kind of a landscape now of cleared fields with islands of remnant bushland, which is a sad and inadequate state of affairs, because a lot of the necessary genetic migration is prevented in these fragmented landscapes, but even as we're noticing, those are themselves being threatened and destroyed. So what I thought I'd do today is talk about the way that clearing and particularly burning took place in the early part of the century. Not, in a sense, we all think we kind of know about it, and we do, but I think the main point about my history is that I was really interested about what these things felt like on the inside. So I show these charts and graphs, and we look around and we can see the final effects, but I also was curious how people who are involved in the process of clearing and burning to create the wheat belt felt about it and how this was described. And so I turned to literature as a kind of interior record of these things. So in the light country, apart from the ring barking and things I've already mentioned, was often just rolled like this, used a large, either made a roller or just an old boiler, dragged behind either horses or a tractor, and then it was burnt. So that was a big part of the early history of the wheat belt. And so I've got some good accounts, I think, of this burning. And again, it's just trying to remember what it felt like. So these things have already happened, but I think it's important for us to remember the sort of severity and savagery of the actual events that led to the clearing of the wheat belt. So this is from farmer Laurie Anderson. He said that the burn was usually done with neighbours joining forces, all hoping for a good stiff wind to keep the stumps alight. This would save days of labour later in carrying by hand wood to stack around any stumps not burned to or below ground level. I have very evocative memories going back to burns after tea with a shovel, taking coals from big ember heaps and placing them up on the upwind side of stumps that are not caught alight. The thousand winking eyes of the coals and the sweet smell of burning strawberry jam tree would remain forever imprinted in my mind. This is from Albert Facey's Fortunate Life. That burning season, Charlie had what was known as a good burn. This term was used when the undergrowth, scrub and timber burnt freely and left only the large logs and stumps. We then started on the clearing. Charlie and I worked hard and long, 6 days a week, from the middle of February through to the end of the first week in April. During that period, we cleared the 130 acres that we chopped and burnt down during the previous August, September and October. And this is another farmer from a place called Yunga out on the Great Eastern Highway near Southern Cross. Soon there was, this is the 1920s, soon there was smoke to be seen down the bottom end of the chopping, followed by huge angry red flames with terrific clouds of black smoke. The wind was getting stronger, but still we waited, us lads being anxious to start lighting. However, Dad kept a strict watch on us. It was not until the fire was well up on both sides that he commenced lighting. We lit a few leaves, then took hold of a dry bush as he did and started lighting. The fire simply roared away with lightning speed. The heat was terrific and it was amazing the way the fire tore along, leaping yards at a time. Gosh, it was roaring through. The fire seemed to set its own draft and draw itself towards the centre. It was very hot. A huge cumulus cloud formed high up in the sky with the dust and smoke. Now there were huge spirals of dust and ash twisting across the burn. So these are very typical accounts of the burn. It's quite it's something that everyone seems to remember when they're thinking back to their time, and it had almost a sacred quality or sacramental quality. People felt like this terrible conflagration and this vast upwelling of natural forces that were being released in the fire was kind of indicative of the founding of these new communities. This is another of the writers I look at, less well known. His name was Cyril Good. He came across in the 1920s. The Nullarbor train had just opened then, so he came across from Victoria, got off at Southern Cross and picked up a block out north of Southern Cross at Turkey Hill. Interviewed sort of maybe 3 decades later in a Melbourne newspaper. He said half the year was spent chopping down the timber and scrub the other half and burning it off. So he worked for 6 years preparing his block, and then the Depression hit, so he never actually produced a crop. So all of his time was spent clearing, and yeah, that's how it happened for him. So that's how he lived the first part of his life in that tent. These are bachelor camps, so 1,000-acre farms with one man on each of them, whole communities settled on that basis. He started writing poetry to sort of pass the time, and this is a poem called The Clearer. As from the horizon, the world's great lamp on a new day brightly flashes. Sorry, it's a bit rhythmic, so bear with me. From out of the timber nearby the camp came sounds of heavy crashes as the axeman, with many a measure swing that set all the echoes waking, thus soon to destruction the largest bring with a crashing of limbs and breaking. In the midst of summer the fire will sweep with the smoke rack dark unfurling through the clearing, and higher the flames will leap in a vortex madly swirling, like a carnival city viewed from a height, whose lights are a changing medley. Will the burning timbers appear at night with their embers glowing redly? Then for weeks, on oppressive, awful days, ere the final stumps are level, the clearer will work in the smoky haze like a medieval devil. He then make canvas and blankets fold and hoist to an able shoulder and drift away to prospect for gold on work on the mines at Boulder. So this, what he's talking about here is not just farmers clearing their own land, but clearing teams. There was a group of Welsh clearers, obviously a lot of Aboriginal people were involved in clearing as well. This work for them. Jack Davis, one of the writers I talk about, does quite a bit of this work as a young man in the Bookton area. That's Cyril Good's father, and that's his wheat field that's been cleared. You can sort of see the bush in the background. One last writer then to talk about fire. James Pollard probably really wrote the first sort of published literature around the wheat belt. Series of books in the 1920s, and he'd emigrated to Australia around the turn of the century with his father. He was a boy at that stage. At 16, he signed up, to fight in the war. Forged his date, and he was injured in the war and gassed, but was given land as a returned serviceman. But he wasn't able to do the work. The idea was that you would go back onto the soldiers were given land, and the land would sort of heal them, but it didn't always work out that way. And he was certainly not able to even do the kind. He couldn't lift a bag of wheat, for instance. So he was too physically and psychologically destroyed, really, to farm. But he did it for a couple of years with the help of his father and his sister, who did most of the work by the sounds of it. But he then became a writer. And this is a poem, this is from a novel, and it describes a fire, and it's just a bushfire, if you like. It's not really a fire for clearing. And so in my book I sort of distinguish between three kinds of fire. This kind of Aboriginal fire, which is sort of a land management practice. Then there's fire for clearing, which only half works for our bushland because it's quite adapted to fire. So you chop it down, burn it, wait for the suckers to grow back, bash them down again. So it's a kind of a continual process. It's not, you don't just burn it and it disappears. And then what we call bushfires, which are sort of fires high-intensity fires that are created when you don't manage the land. So this is one of those. Renee had never seen a bushfire. In the shadow of the billowing smoke of this one, she was awed yet not afraid. It stirred and thrilled her. Pete looked at her once and she did not notice his glance. He saw that for the time being she was fascinated by the scene, and he smiled wanly. Even now he felt impelled to watch the work of the forces sweeping the forest away in smoke and flame. So it's sort of, although this fire is a description not of a clearing fire, it clearly is reminiscent of the language you saw in the other fires. He'd never seen a forest fire rage as this one raged. No forest he had known in the wheatlands had escaped the fiery destroyer for as long as this forest had. No other forest had been allowed to become so densely crowded with undergrowth. They felt the heat even here, but did not move again. Pete saw that several other fires had started among the trees. Soon these merged with the greater body, and the whole forest appeared to be burning in mass. The roar grew louder, wilder, and many voices seemed to the girl and the man to be rushing back and forth and swirling through the trees. They heard the crashings of falling branches, the crackling of swift scorched limbs and twigs and foliage. Now and again, a muffled report as a tree split open. Above the timber, the fire voices ascended, far with the eddying smoke, smoke speckled with sputs and flakes of charcoal. So that's all quite depressing, right? In some ways. Rachel had said that one of the things that they're quite interested in today is not just focusing on destruction and things that have gone, but on real solutions and ways forward. And I felt, as someone who lives in Perth, not especially minded to offer advice in any way, not competent to do so. But there is a hope in some of this, a perverse kind of hope, which is, it's really quite striking because the way the wheat belt was settled around these farms, which were essentially miniature businesses. You know, they're built around a kind of owner-occupier crop producer. So each farm was effectively a business, and there was quite a degree in that sense of competition and competitiveness as you competed with your neighbours to sell your crop and so on, or your other produce. But I think what's really comes through quite powerfully in the history of the wheat belt is actually the capacity for collective action, and again, strangely, it's remarked upon by almost everyone who remembers these fires. They were collective exercises because it required a certain amount of people to make sure it was done effectively, and also because everyone, you know, was potentially at risk of any fire that anyone else lit. Everyone would burn. They would do the burns together. So if you were burning up on your land, your neighbours would help you. If they were burning up on their land, you would help them. So it was a kind of an occasion where people worked together for the common good. So although it was, and I guess what I'm saying there, actually, just to take another example, when the Depression hit, the low yields in Western Australia make farming in some ways quite marginal, but it's profitable because we can do it efficiently. And one of the things that was quite remarkable in the West Australian wheat belt was the move to cooperative bulk handling, which is another example of kind of collective action within the history of the wheat belt, which really, I think, did a lot to preserve the wheat belt through the ravages of the Depression, the 30s. The fact that it could still move grain quite efficiently through this, what was then a brand new way of handling grain. So with cooperative bulk handling and the collective action that came in the actual burning and destruction of the landscape, I think there is grounds for hope, which is that there is this historical capacity to work collectively to solve problems. So the problems that were being solved then, which were getting rid of the landscape or moving grain support more efficiently, people were able to do from within the wheat belt. So I think one of the things, I guess, values, I suppose, of the work that I tried to do with this literary history of the wheat belt was to say that there are within the history of the wheat belt, there are historical examples of what people have done to make a difference to the world that they lived in. So I think, although what I've spent today focusing on is what seems like almost like a Holocaust, really, the destruction of a horrific scale and frightening severity, which, you know, you saw in these odd accounts, the strange exhilaration that exists in all of those accounts. Within that, we can also find, I think, the seeds for genuine collective problem solving. You know, the problems that they faced were no greater than the problems that we face now. So I think there is the capacity and the demonstrated capacity historically to do this. The challenge is there now to make it happen. Thank you.